I'm going to show you how to bag out a facing and lining around an invisible zip. So we've got our exercise where we've put in our invisible zip and done our darts on our skirt back. And here I have a pair of facings, waist facings for the skirt, and I've attached my skirt lining onto the bottom of the facing ready to go. What you'll often see with skirt linings, instead of stitching the dart in, often what you do instead is you just make the dart value into a tuck, and what that does is it just releases the fabric and enables it to move across the hip. So it just gives it a little bit more give. So the first thing I'm going to do, I've neatened my seam allowance on my centre back seam. I haven't worried about doing it on the facing because that facing edge will be bagged out around the top of the zip. However, further down below the zip, the seam allowance is free and the hem is free. So I've just neatened that seam allowance to make sure that it doesn't fray away because it's open on the skirt back. So the first thing I'm going to do is bring my linings together. Now I've got my zipper notch, which I can find here. This is where the bottom of the zip is here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start sewing centre back seam about 1 centimetre below that zipper notch. And the reason why I'm going a bit below is I want to keep the lining away from the workings of the zipper teeth. So about 1 centimetre below, and just start sewing 1 centimetre seam allowance. And I'm doing this in a contrast thread so that you can see the stitching. Usually you do it in the same colour so you wouldn't be seeing it. So there's my centre back seam stitched, and now I'm ready to bag out my lining and facing around my zip. And we do this before we finish the waist off. The waist seam gets done after you bag out around the zip. So I'm just going to place that so it's wrong sides together, and this is where it's going to get stitched in. So I'm going to sew that right sides together, and I need to pull the facing over 1 centimetre to allow for the fact that I'm not stitching the facing in at centre back, I'm stitching it out 5 millimetres from centre back. So I need to lose 1 centimetre on that edge. And I'll need my right hand zipper foot to do this side. Make sure that your waist edges are together, and then sewing about 5 millimetres out from the centre back seam, and I can see where I've stitched that zip in there on centre back. Now as you come down towards the bottom of the zip, you need to bring your seam allowances together. So by the time I get down to where the notch is down here, my edges need to be together. So I'm just going to gradually bring that down so that I'm 1 centimetre out at the top. And then by the time I get down to the zipper notch, my edges are together. Now when I get down towards the bottom, the zipper pull tab gets in the way, so I'm just going to break off my stitching, and I'll come back and finish that off afterwards. So that's this side in. Now I can do the same thing on the other side. So you're sewing it with your right sides together. It's easier to do it if you have the skirt on the top so that you can see where that centre back stitch line is. I'm going to line up my edges at the top and pop a pin in there, and then down the bottom here I need to bring that edge over so that the edges match down near the zipper notch. And I'll just get in as close as I can. It's quite bulky down that end, so just start up a little bit. Don't worry about doing a back tack because we'll be joining on and finishing that up down the bottom. And then just stitching that in 5mm out from the centre back stitch line. Like that. Now I can come in and I can move that zipper pull tab out of the way. So I need to get that lining out of the way. And then pull that up. Just halfway will do. And then I can come back in here and have a look at the bottom of the lining. So at the moment I've still got this area here that's loose, and what I want to do is I want to make sure that the stitch line, the centre back stitch line of the lining stays in the middle of the zipper tape, and then I just want to finish off stitching that down. So you could pop a pin in there to hold that where you've lined it up with the centre of the zip tape. Now I've just managed to catch that seam allowance in there without knowing that that's happened, so I'm just going to unpick that a little bit. And this is the sort of quality control you need to be doing while you're sewing. If you do see something like that, it's very easy to fix that up before you go on. Okay, so now I can join up that stitching, back tack, take that pin out, and I'll just recheck that. And then I'm just going to finish sewing just a little bit above where the lining centre back stitch line is. And I'll do the same thing on the other side. So I'll come in here, I'll make sure that the centre back stitch line on the lining lines up with the centre of the zipper teeth, and then holding that together I'm going to join up. You can't actually see that very well, so I'm going to flip that over, recheck that, and then just a little bit above, starting just a little bit above and joining up my stitching there. So that when that's finished, you can see how the lining is sitting about 5mm back from the zipper teeth, so it's not going to interfere with the zipper teeth. And once that's pressed open, it will sit fairly flat around the bottom of the zip. To bag out around the waistline, and I've shown this on another video, but we'll just run over it quickly again. So you need to fold the facing and lining back using the zipper teeth edge as your fold line, or the centre back stitch line as your on the zip as your fold line, and then sewing along the top of the waistline. We've got a 1cm seam allowance there. You can pop a pin in there if you need to. Change your foot back. Now, normally you would stitch your side seam of your front on before you finish the waist, and then you could do it all in one go. Or if you wanted to, you could just start part way along, leaving this area free so that you can finish your seam allowance later. So it doesn't matter which way you do that. Just make sure that you line it up so that it matches on the side seam. 1cm seam allowance on the waist. And then when you turn that inside, you have a really neat bagged out facing and lining around your invisible zip. You would do the same on the other side, and then you can understitch the facing towards the seam allowance towards the facing is a good finish too. I'll just do that quickly to show you. So understitching, or it's sometimes called edge stitching or pin stitching. And you can only go so far, probably to within about 4 centimetres of the centre back, and that just keeps the facing pressed under so you don't see it on the outside of the skirt. And there's our finish around our invisible zip.